The Varan ring hung over a pale blue dwarf like a broken bracelet. Ships of glass, bone, and liquid metal drifted toward locked berths while ambassadors traded titles. 100 banners flickered in vacuum. Under the flicker, a woman in a plain gray jacket walked with a paper notebook and the posture of someone who preferred library stacks to tribunals. "Delegate on approach," the station announced. "Terran Union observation status." Captain Jonah Pike of the dock guard glanced down at the human shuttle and snorted. It looked like a grain silo with windows. When the hatch opened, the woman stepped out with a single companion carrying a duffel that had seen better days. "Commander Naomi Park," she told the customs drone. "Terran Civil Defense. We're here to listen." Listen. Most arrive to speak. "Which is why someone should listen," Naomi said, tucking a pencil behind her ear. The amphitheater could hold a city block. Seats fit water breathers and titans alike. The dais floated on grav anchors. Naomi and Chief Warrant Elias Monroe took a ring of folding chairs by a maintenance hatch. She flipped open her notebook. He sat counting exits. The first to speak were the Corin Ascendancy, bodies like carved sapphire with voices tuned for cathedrals. High Marshal Varkesh spread 6 slender arms. "Against the archive hegemony," he declaimed, "we bring 39 cathedral-class carriers. Our mirror lances unweave matter at the phase line. Our record is unbroken." The hall chimed with approval tones. Naomi wrote, 39. Phase line weapons, excess heat waste. Next, the brute combine clattered forward in welded armor, tusks polished like ivory sabers. "We charge," General Cowles snorted. "Board, tier." He lifted an axe meant for whale harpooning and thunked it into the speaker rail. "Their machine priests will learn to fear steel in the dark." Naomi wrote, boarding preference, predictable vector. Then came the weft, amorphous arrays of motes organized by magnetic field. Their representative spoke through a harmonic grid. "We have never been conquered. Our coherence negates hostile computation. Their archive cannot index us." Naomi wrote, pride and blind spots. One by one, 12 powers paraded. Each speech was a polished stone turned to catch the light. Plasma lattices, harmonic disruptors, bioadaptive hulls, machine intelligences with careful names. Each described doctrine as if doctrine were gravity. Each offered numbers like talismans. When the floor recognized the Terran Union, the amphitheater quieted, not out of respect but curiosity, the way a crowd quiets to watch a trick with a rabbit. Naomi stood, small against architecture designed to dwarf humility. "Commander Park," the chair intoned. "Your contribution." Naomi looked down at her notes, then up at the ocean of faces. "We have 12 system guards fitted for civil defense and rescue," she said. "Tugs, miners, and 2 cutters. We brought no carriers. Our doctrine emphasizes evacuation, salvage, and interference." A ripple of laughter washed the lower tiers. A Nexari cluster chimed, "The tender will teach us war." Naomi's pencil paused mid-scratch. "No," she said evenly, "the tender will take notes." Varkesh tilted his crown. "Notes will not stop the archive." "Neither will confidence," Naomi replied, and the pencil moved again. For hours the chamber spun around numbers. The archive hegemony did not devour biology like a swarm. They devoured context. Their fleets memorized opponents mid-battle, cached the patterns, then returned revised. The Ascendancy praised mirror lances. The Combine worshipped boarding. The Weft blessed coherence. Naomi asked questions, not many, enough to tug a thread. "What's your reaction time from doctrine deviation?" She asked the Ascendancy how long to heat shed after a sustained phase lance volley. To the Combined she asked, how many boarding chains can you break before your formation unknits? To the Weft, can your coherence hold if you are forced to enumerate what you normally treat as continuous? When the session adjourned, Elias found her in the corridor, studying a maintenance grate. You spent 5 hours letting them laugh at us, he said. I spent 5 hours auditing the rhythms of their pride. She tapped the grate with her pencil, and finding where the air goes. He folded his arms. Naomi, we have 12 tugs, 2 cutters, and a mining outfit that still smells like kerosene. The archive aren't pirates. Footnotes are how historians rewrite a bad chapter, she said, and wrote one word, patience. 3 weeks later, the War Council sent the greatest fleet in a generation to the Holly's expanse, a starless bruise full of archive scouts. Naomi's request to ride with the rescue net was approved. Her tugs and cutters slipped under the Armada's shadow. On the last night before the engagement, Elias found her on the cutter's catwalk, staring at braided carbon cable thick as a wrist. What are those for? History, she said without looking away. And gravity, and ships that forget they are boats. That's not an answer. It's better than the wrong question. She shut the notebook. The bruise at the edge of stars pulsed. Somewhere in it, a civilization mistook memory for mastery. Naomi Park exhaled. They called it the Holly's demonstration later. At the time, it was a map of bright icons and a silence no one wanted to break. The Armada deployed like a textbook. Ascendancy carriers in the center, Weft grids in a halo, combined rams on the flanks, lesser allies layered like scales. The archive arrived like an equation, sleek archivists and copper ships, skirmishers like spindles of frost. They did not speak, they recorded. Ascendancy mirror lances live, someone announced. Spears of braided light fractured vacuum. Archive vanguards sliced apart and froze in their trajectories, glittering like confetti. For 7 minutes, Doctrine wrote triumph. On minute 8 it changed. Naomi watched from her cutter, hands folded around her pencil until the wood clicked. Her display bloomed with errors. The archive did not block attacks, they wrote filters for them. The next volley of mirror lances glanced off hulls reshaped an instant before impact. Coherent stones were returned inverted. Combined rams sank into enemy ships and did not emerge. The enemy closed like a book. Rescue channel opening, Elias said, already queuing tugs. We're going to have traffic. Naomi nodded. We won't add to the traffic. Commander, keep our signature cold. Quiet ships live to pull louder ones. On the net, Var-Kesh demanded perseverance. The Weft demanded harmony. The Combined demanded blood. The archive said nothing, because the archive never spoke out loud. They spoke in adjustments. They turned the Armada's one doctrine into 12 bad copies of a mistake. Ascendancy carriers breaking, Elias reported. Weft grid decohering, Combined left flank is. The display stuttered, and for a heartbeat it looked like the whole war had frozen. When the picture returned, it contained fewer, lonelier icons. Naomi placed the pencil on her knee. Deploy the lariats. Elias blinked. Now, or later we'll be fishing for corpses. The lariats were old ideas with new materials. Carbon cable with mass clamps fired from tug-mounted throwers. They shot toward crippled ships and stitched them to tugs and rocks and anything that could drag them out of the archive's field of view. Where boarding chains once let galleys bite, Naomi's lines let rescues bite distance. Arc the cables low across the rams, she said. They think in straight lines. When they do, cut again, our side. The first throw took an ascendancy frigate that had lost control authority but not hope. The second snagged a weft node bleeding motes into vacuum. A combined ram powered through a snare, snarled, and then, confused, stumbled as Naomi ordered a deliberate cut. The sudden lack of tension yanked the tug and the ram apart at angles no algorithm had predicted. Trajectories in the archive formation hiccuped. The hiccup spread. Again, Naomi said, make their perfect lines trip over our dirty ropes. Naomi tuned out the shouting and counted rhythms. The archive had reaction times, they were not gods. Every throw-in cut turned a little area weird, as if gravity forgot its step. The archive adjusted, once, twice, 3 times, then chose to ignore the noise as non-lethal clutter. Mark that, Naomi said. When we force them to choose between adaptation and attention, they choose targets over clutter. By minute 12, victory dissolved. The armada scattered toward escape vectors. The archive pursued in tidy ranks. Naomi's convoy of 3 tugs and a cutter moved perpendicular to both. Rescue lines flicked out and back, threading through lanes the archive assumed were empty. They pulled who they could, anchored others on ballistic arcs that would bring them home months later if the math held and the enemies forgot. Varkesh is ordering a stand at Point Theta, comms said. He wants the weft to flood the grid. He wants yesterday, Naomi said. Give him coordinates. Elias swore softly. They won't listen. We are not here to be heard. We are here to count and to steal. By the time the archive finished disassembling resistance at Theta, Naomi had lariated 7 ships to safety and nudged 9 onto survivable drift. 2 tugs were wounded, 1 was missing. The cutter's paint was raked by near misses. Naomi's notebook held reaction times, heat spikes, and how the archive prioritized engine flares over cold mass. Commander, Elias said, we're on their scan. All ships cease throws, engines off, bleed heat, silence. The archive ships slid past, uninterested, hunting loud prey. A combined flagship tried one last theatrical charge and vanished inside folding geometry. When the pursuit ended and the archive withdrew to harvest wreckage, Naomi lit the engines. They limped to a rendezvous no one had planned. Varkesh appeared on a damaged channel. In the flicker, his crown was crooked. Terran, he said. No sneer now, only exhaustion. You pulled my frigate, and 3 of my crews. Yes, Naomi said. How? Not to challenge for once, but to learn. With rope, Naomi said, and the willingness to look small. In the cutter's galley, Elias poured coffee strong. We can't win with rope, he said. No, but rope taught us something the archive didn't bother to memorize. And what's that? She tapped the notebook. What they ignore when they are busy winning. The council cracked like thin ice after Hollies. No one said defeat, they said reassessment, redeployment, strategic pause. The archive said nothing, they never did. Their silence turned every corridor into a church nave. Human space went quiet in a different way. The news feeds that had once feasted on humiliation went dark, then pragmatic. The Terran Union requisitioned junk, derelict tanks, retired cargo nets, shuttle ballast, mining slag, kilometer spools of cable, pallets of nails. Shipyards that had dreamed of sleek destroyers accepted contracts for ugly machines. The work orders read like a hardware store exploded. Elias met Naomi on a platform tucked behind Jupiter's radiation belt. The station looked like scaffolding that forgot to stop. Struts vanished into shadow. Below, barges pushed rocks the way ants push leaves. You're building a warship museum, he said. I'm building a museum that fights back, she said. She led him through bays where welders stitched steel to steel without shame. No shimmering shields, no invisible drives, rockets that smoked, cannons that recoiled, nets that looked like the ocean had climbed into orbit. "What do we call all this?" he asked. "Operation Sluice," Naomi said. "A sluice turns a flood into work." He raised a brow. "And the enemy?" "Flood," she said. "They wash in on assumptions." She took him to the classroom because she insisted every weapons bay be paired with a room that smelled faintly of chalk. A dozen mechanics in stained coveralls sat with pilots and a pair of ascendancy officers who had defied their pride to learn. On the board Naomi had written, "History is a user manual." "Morning," she said. "Today, Corvus, the boarding bridge that let Rome turn sea duels into land battles on decks. Today, chain booms across rivers. Today, fire ships. Today, the Brooklyn Bridge. Today, Apollo, because sometimes the old trick is using pencils where pens fail." A weft observer hummed at the back. "History is uncompressed pattern," it said. Naomi nodded. "And pattern is what the archive thinks it owns, so we'll give them noise." She walked them through the builds. "Curtains," she said, and showed an orbital diagram where curtains of cable hung like iron rain between Lagrange points. "Curtains cut, but more importantly, they tangle. Their computers can avoid knives. They have a harder time avoiding embarrassment." "Gravel guns," she continued. "A century ago, pilots feared birds. We will make them fear pebbles. Basalt shot launched from coil throwers. No signature, no story to memorize, just impacts and the math of regret." "Solar sails," she said, and now a few hands lifted because sails sounded noble. "Not for travel, for shadow. We'll unfurl sails to bloom and die, casting moving umbria across their targeting models. Their lances will waste heat on ghosts." "Decoys," she said. "Radio, not quantum. Static, not smart. Smart is their game. We will be stubborn instead." "Caltrops," Elias read from the list. "Are we putting medieval road spikes in space now?" "We are," Naomi said. "Hooks of hardened wire. Some will be baited with mass clamps, some with nothing at all. The archive will allocate attention to the ones that hurt them today and carry bad habits into tomorrow." An ascendancy officer raised a reluctant hand. "Commander Park," he said, crown slightly askew. "If this works, it will be because they underestimate it. What happens when they stop underestimating? Then we give them something else to underestimate," Naomi said. "Not because we're clever, because we can afford to be simple faster than they can afford to be complex." After class, Elias walked with her along a catwalk that could have been borrowed from a shipyard in 1942. Below, workers in EVA harnesses guided a girder the length of a cathedral into a launch cradle. "You're turning the solar system into a trap," he said. "I'm turning it into a workshop," she said. "Traps rust, workshops adapt. Do you ever want to build something pretty?" "Every day," she said, "but pretty is for when the roof doesn't leak." He leaned on the rail. "We won't get statues for this. We'll get hands that remember how to hold tools," she said. "That's worth more than statues." She looked out at Mars and the belt and all the yawning, useful emptiness between. "Elias," she said, "do you know why we keep paper notebooks? Because you're sentimental. Because pencils work in more conditions than pens," she said. "Because sometimes the better technology is the one that tolerates failure." She flipped her notebook to a clean page and drew 3 boxes. "They have habit, they have speed, they have contempt. We can touch all 3. "How?" "Curtains for habit," she said, tapping the first. "Gravel for speed. Tap. And humility for contempt. Humility is not a weapon. It's why we'll live long enough to learn." She closed the book. "Send the last orders. The archive is probing Neptune. How do you know? Because if I were them, I would come now while the paint is wet. He nodded and keyed the command net. Across a system no one had ever used as a system, not like this. Engines woke, slow, smoky, and sufficient. Sails unspooled to wait for light. Guns accepted their hoppers of rock. Cables slept coiled like snakes that had read the same history and learned patience. Operation Sluice did not look like a wonder. It looked like a job. The archive came at dawn, which meant a clock Naomi set for herself. Their lead elements crossed Neptune's orbit with the poise of predators sure of their place on the food chain. They had rewritten Hollies and cached their corrections. They expected hard light and arguments made of math. They found curtains. From L4 and L5, from barges and orphan platforms, the first cable veils unrolled like iron rain. The strands were invisible until they were not. Then they were everything, a geometry of embarrassment. Skirmishers met wire they could not enumerate fast enough. A dozen small ships pinwheeled, cut their own way free, and drifted wrapped in thread as if shame itself had mass. Curtain a-holding, Elias reported. Curtain be tearing. It's supposed to, Naomi said. A torn net makes holes that invite mistakes. The archive suppressed confusion. Their rear ranks shifted arcs, wrote new paths, and poured through the gaps with practiced ease. They accepted the cost to buy a clearer shot at the inner planets. They found shadows. On Naomi's mark, 100 sails blossomed. Light struck them and trailed false umbri across the archive's predictive models. Mirror lances fired at ghosts. Phase lines carved sculptures from vacuum. When sails ran hot, crews cut them loose and unfurled others. The tactical picture became a forest of moving shade, hunters slow in forests. Gravel ready, the gunnery chief said. Bleed it, Naomi said. It did not look like a weapon on a slide. Sensors tried to classify, they lacked a category for grit. For an enemy that worshipped optimization, friction hurt. Where Hollies was minutes of arrogance and massacre, Neptune became hours of irritation and setbacks. Third wave entering the belt, comms said. Copper ships flanking. Call the boom, Naomi said. They lit charges inside hollowed rocks. The blast shook stones loose into timed avalanches. Whole fields drifted at planned moments, turning lanes into slow puzzles. A copper ship tried to compute it whole and burned a processor array. They are learning, Elias said. Good, Naomi said. Learning takes time. Time is a field we know. An ascendancy officer at the back of the room leaned forward, absorbed despite himself. Your doctrine is not to win outright. Our doctrine removes the word outright, Naomi said. Win in pieces, deny them clean data, break their appetite, then pick. Pick what? Targets that anchor confidence. They picked one. An archivist command spindle moved with tidy indifference at the rear, allocating adaptation like a banker. Naomi marked it on the main screen like a crate in a warehouse. Curtain there, gravel here, sails 2 rounds, Illy lariat their escort. The room stilled. A rope at a command ship. At its escort, Naomi said. Then we cut our end. When they trim the tether, they'll waste 30 seconds correcting for the gift of momentum. It went close to the chalkboard. The escort dodged the first curtain, caught the second, burned it, and soaked a sail's shadow, misreading dark as clear. Gravel stitched its radiators. The lariat snag reversed a guidance burn and fed it back as failure. The command spindle reallocated attention to an embarrassment instead of a threat. In those 30 seconds, a prospector tug that once hauled nickel hit it with a barge of stone. No banners, no trumpets. The spindle bent wrong and stopped arranging the world. Archive logic hiccuped. What had been tidy became merely adequate. Adequate left gaps. Now the tugs, Naomi said. Commander, the tugs are. For pulling survivors and thread, she said. We'll unspool the edges. They did. What the archive called a front, Naomi treated like cloth. Tugs pulled on loose things. Escorts cut off from their banks, skirmishers with troubled heat budgets, proud machines taught to ignore rope. Some targets were killed. More were humiliated into drift. The archive began to divert more and more computation to saving face. By sundown on Naomi's clock, the lead thrust had not reached Mars. The inner system looked like a workshop after a rush, cluttered, scored, functional. Losses existed. Simple is not painless. But the line held without shining marvels. It held with gravel and cables. Varkesh's bruised voice came over secure band. Commander Park, he said, this works. It buys us breath, Naomi said. Breath turns into sentences. Sentences become a story. What story? The one where the archive cannot write ours for us. She ended the link and looked at a map that was not a victory yet but a refusal to lose on schedule. Her pencil hovered over the notebook. Elias, she said, here, send the packet, specifications, training, the lecture notes, to the council, to whoever is still listening, she said, and draft the next board. What's it called? She flipped the page and wrote, humility again, and under it, offense. After Neptune, the archive did not retreat so much as pivot. Their traffic along the dark lanes thickened with scouts wearing fresh heuristics like new uniforms. They had folded cable into their simulations, learned to prune sails, even started to sprinkle grit into their own weapon conduits so our gravel would not surprise their radiators twice. They thought themselves cured by exposure therapy. Naomi Park watched all this from a cold bay hung behind Jupiter's radiation shadow, pencil resting on a blank page that had waited 3 sleepless nights. She listened, always listening to the coalition channels that spanned a dozen languages and 2 kinds of song. Pride had grown quiet after Hollies. Quiet can be wisdom. It can also be shock. What we forced them to swallow, she told Elias, was not rope. It was embarrassment. They will try to vaccinate themselves with a dose. Elias set a steel mug beside her notebook. The mug's bottom was dented and he refused to replace it. So we make embarrassment contagious. We make predictability impossible. She turned the pencil, tapping the eraser on the page's margin. The archive eats patterns. Let's change the recipe, not with lies, with truths that will not line up. She convened captains and crew chiefs, welders and weft nodes, a Koran choir master with a voice tuned to cathedrals, and a combined drum line that called storms to heel. On the chalkboard she wrote, static. Beneath it, honest noise. Naomi's doctrine was simple and unacceptable to people who liked immaculate solutions. Every ship would broadcast its doctrine honestly. Reactor heartbeats, boarding tempos, coherence maps, even the angles pilots preferred when they were tired. But never on the same beat, never at the same phase, and never in the same key. The goal was not deception, it was refusal to be compressed. Varkesh bristled. We honed those rhythms for millennia. You ask us to unlearn heritage. I'm asking you to keep it, Naomi said, but stop marching to a parade ground you told the enemy about in advance. Sing your song, sing it wrong together. The weft representative brightened in that way a swarm does. Uncoordinated truth as anti-index. Elias, practical as a winch, asked the question everyone else circled. Won't we jam ourselves? We will be clumsy, Naomi admitted. Clumsy is the price of not being a statue. They tested the doctrine over Procyon, a sun so white the bridge cameras wore sunglasses. The archive had picked it for demonstration, having convinced themselves our curtains and gravel were quaint, and our sails were weather now accounted for. Their copperships formed elegant wedges that looked like proofs in a math textbook. They were prepared to adapt to modern art. They were not prepared for a bazaar. On Naomi's mark, the choir began. Ascendancy carriers boomed reactor cycles on open channels while tapping code with their navigational lights, too fast for a proper intercept but just slow enough to tempt a software ear. Combined rams announced boarding vectors before launches, then launched on different vectors, then announced that trick as if it were doctrine. The WEFT posted coherence maps in raw form, true, but so constant they became a false horizon. Human cutters read children's alphabets in Morse, then switched to lullabies tapped on hull, rhythms no algorithm had bothered to label. The battle space turned into noon in a market, hawkers shouting, drums arguing with bells, the smell of spice and engine oil. Archive copperships tried to quantize it. Their templates split into fragments that contradicted each other. They paused half a heartbeat, then two, as if an invisible conductor had left the pit. Static holds, Elias reported, eyebrows high. We're stepping on our own toes, but theirs too. Now give them something tidy to bite, Naomi said. She lit false cadence. 3 precise pings spaced like our old pulse laser rhythm, projected from a tug tied to a slag barge. The archive pounced, wrote counters for a weapon we were no longer firing, and opened their flanks to rams that came 1 beat late and 2 decks sideways. Where mirror lances dreamed of clean lines, they found cables. Where boarding calculators wanted silence, they found choirs arguing cheerfully. Procyon did not become a victory parade. It became a field trip we survived by refusing to stand in rows. A dozen ships died, 10 times that lived who would not have. When the archive withdrew, frustrated, not defeated, the coalition channel filled with laughter that sounded like someone had finally exhaled after months underwater. In the after-action review, a Quarren lieutenant admitted, embarrassed and delighted, that his carrier group had performed better when his choristers were half a measure late. We have punished hesitation for centuries, he said. This felt human. Naomi wiped chalk dust from her fingers. Hesitation isn't always fear, she said. Sometimes it's listening. She ended the council early and walked the catwalk above the build bays. Welders burned lines into steel, nets coiled on drums. Schoolchildren visiting from Ganymede pressed gloved palms to the glass and stared at a tug tractor as if it were a dragon. What did you see today? Elias asked, falling into step. Proof, Naomi said. Not that the archive can be broken, that we can refuse their metronome, and that refusal is something we can teach. He nodded toward the classroom doors. Then tomorrow morning, she smiled and finally wrote on the page that had kept her awake, static gospel, and under it, a line borrowed from an old Earth hymn, sing it until you believe it. The archive did not complain when Procyon lived. They simply kept writing. Their scouts arrived carrying new indices that tasted of our static, their skirmishers wearing counter-noise like earmuffs. When you teach a machine that its enemy is messy, it becomes a tidier machine. Naomi knew what tidy machines did next. They went for the places that hated mess. Capitals are rituals you can land on. The Quarren Ascendancy's homeworld ringed its equator with cathedrals that could focus sunlight into prayer. The Combine's throne moon orbited a gas giant in parades of armor-plated monasteries. The Weft's cradle was a glimmer cloud stitched to a pearl of a planet. Each place had spent centuries convincing itself that the center of a story belonged at the center of a map. Naomi argued until chalk broke. "Make your capitals obnoxious," she said at Ceres, to an audience of officers who would have felt more at ease in a palace. "Pollute the lanes with junk. Hang curtains in your own sky. Break your own metronomes. If you insist on being the middle, you must learn to be untidy." Varkesh folded 3 hands over 3 others. "Our people need symbols." "Then give them stools instead of thrones," Naomi said. "Stools can be carried. Symbols that cannot move become targets that cannot dodge." He flinched as if she had insulted his ancestors. Perhaps she had. The archive cares nothing for insult, they care for inventory. They arrived at Corin Prime with a librarian's patience and a butcher's knife, wrapped in the same glove. Ascendancy doctrine met them in perfect formation, mirrors polished, choirs tuned, banners calculated to inspire. Naomi diverted what she could. Tug strings in shadow, gravel thrown from moon warehouses, sails to complicate the lensing towers. She could not unteach a world its pride in a week. The fighting was brief and ceremonial, and therefore fatal. Archive copyships translated the geometry of cathedrals into armor patterns, and fired those patterns back like scripture turned to shrapnel. A palace that had survived 3 dynasties peeled open along a seam that matched a hymn. When the dust thinned, the cathedrals were cored. Sunlight poured through wounds designed for light. The ascendancy did not weep where outsiders could see, but there is a way a crown tilts that tells you how heavy it has become. Varkesh spoke on a private band from a room whose walls still remembered being sacred. "Terran," he said to Naomi in a voice that had lost its marble, "we did as we were." "And we do as we learn," she said. "Will you move?" He looked at the book of his people, at a window that now framed vacuum. "We will," he said, and he meant the hard version. The Combine learned faster because loss found them earlier in life. They took axes off walls and used them to cut ceremonial bridges into emergency planks. The weft dispersed their cradle into a dozen daughter clouds, weeping as only a swarm can weep, by lowering the amplitude of song. While capitals burned or unbuilt, Naomi and Elias taught workshops like paramedics. They taught how to tie a ship to a rock and call it command, how to power a city on 3 bad generators and a promise, how to practice drills that turned opera into pantry work, count bolts, count neighbors, count the quiet so you hear the wrong quiet. Ethics committees sprouted where statues had stood. The archive taught us the wrong lesson, that victory excused methods. Naomi insisted on the right lesson, that methods survive the enemy. In Classroom 12 on Ceres, a weft cluster raised a question in harmonic. "Commander Park, is deception moral when survival is at stake?" "What we are doing is not deception," she said. "It is refusing to be a single portrait when the painter wants one. We don't lie about who we are. We become many of who we are." A human cadet lifted a hand uncertainly. "And the rocks, the rams, we've killed thousands." Naomi looked at the floor long enough to teach that silence is not evasion. "War is the failure of all the better conversations," she said. "When it comes, restraint is the only thing you can keep that will be worth having when it goes." She wrote on the board, "proportionality," then underlined it twice. "We aim at machines that wear stolen faces and at ships that choose to erase ours. We move populations first. We audit ourselves after." In the evenings, when Welder's arcs dimmed and even the belt looked tired, Naomi walked the museum that the series' schoolchildren had made from salvage. There were tools behind glass that did not deserve glass: a miner's hammer, a lariat hook, a coffee mug with a dent. She left notes on sticky paper. Do not let this become sacred. Use it if needed. Elias joined her in front of a wall painted with chalkboard paint. Across the top, history is a user manual. Under it, someone had drawn a throne and crossed it out. In its place, a three-legged stool. Were we too harsh with Var Kesh? Elias asked. We were late, Naomi said. Late is harsher than honest. She flipped her notebook open and added 2 lines beneath the days lists. One read, steal nothing we would not gift back in peace. The second, teach people to argue better than the archive computes. When the next alert came, Vega, copper factories thick as grubs in a carcass, it found a coalition that no longer needed a dais to speak. It found captains who carried stools and councils that had learned to meet in kitchens. It found Naomi already on a tug deck that smelled like burnt oil and bread because someone had decided the galley mattered. Offense? Elias asked. Only if we can write it in pencil, she said, so we remember we can erase. Vega had been mapped as a promise once, bright, stable, civilized. Now its orbits hummed with archive industry, copper factories stacked in rings that ate their own exhaust and spat templates like seeds. Naomi's plan had a name that worried people who owned pretty uniforms. Operation Anvil sounded like something that would dent you if you stood too near. That was fine. Honest words lower surprise in the wrong places. First came patience. For months, really, for years no one realized we're preparation. Belt crews nudged rock the way farmers nudge water. A sluice here, a berm there, a cut made decades before harvest. Barges scarred like old cattle ferried mass into quiet orbits. Nets stitched nothing to nothing under the eyes of patrols that did not notice chores. An anvil is any place in the world you can count on being hard when the hammer falls. Then came the ethics brief Naomi refused to skip, because everything worth winning is worth winning in a way you can teach aloud. Civilians first. Habitat maps current. Evacuation rails built inside lies that everyone politely called maintenance corridors. Several captains argued that surprise and mercy do not travel together. Naomi let them talk until they were tired of their own bravery. Proportionality is not a leash, she said when the room went thoughtful. It is a tool we will need to fix what we break. If we abandon it, we teach the wrong people how to live hereafter. The archive noticed the mustering and tutted in code, thickening screens, spinning drones, adjusting appetite. They had adapted to curtains and gravel and were learning to budget embarrassment. They were not prepared for a weather report that read, rockfall. At the minute Naomi had written months earlier in a notebook that still smelled of graphite. Tugs lit old engines strapped to older stone. Asteroids the size of theaters, then stadiums, then small neighborhoods shifted from someday orbits into today vectors. The archive computed intercepts as predicted and found the problem unworthy of them. They could swat one rock, 20 with effort. They could not swat a sky where every point that looked empty was already falling. First wave falling, Elias called. On the display, arcs converged. Slow, stupid, holy arcs. Copper ships rushed to swat and were caught in curtains strung across sprint lanes, because of course there were curtains. Phase lances carved glitter through debris that did not notice being beautiful. She waited for the sound only she expected, a chorus of course corrections. Even machines sigh when they realize the problem is not the one they trained for. Across channels that pretended to be quiet, the archive reallocated attention from offense to tidying. "Second wave," Naomi said. "Bring the hammer." The hammer was not clever. It was the immortal trick of the fireship repainted for space. Surplus freighters stuffed with chemical fuel bolted tight, crewed by volunteers who intended to return. Where the archive expected drone swarms and elegant munitions, they found consumables and stubbornness. The freighters came in ragged lines, some broadcasting psalms, some broadcasting jokes, all broadcasting heat. Copper ships targeting priorities flickered and lagged. "Close the tongs," Naomi said. "No anvil works without tongs." Ascendancy destroyers with their crowns removed moved like honest workers around a block, catching, levering, denying. Combine rams learned to step in time with tug cuts, a dance that should never have been pretty and was. The weft darkened their song to a hum that fooled rangefinders. Human cutters spent their ordnance and then their ramming mass and then curses that sounded like prayer. Through the storm, a single archive command spindle held. It turned calmly, writing instructions to dying children. Centers are habits, and habits can be broken for the sake of memory. Naomi marked it, not because killing it would end the war, but because teaching matters in the middle of doing. "Give me 3, she said. "A barge, a curtain, and something that feels like luck." Luck was a freighter that failed a minute early and drifted into exactly the right alley. The barge pushed that wreck into path. The curtain blistered against a hull unaccustomed to embarrassment. The spindle veered to correct the social geometry of a fleet. A prospector tug that had hauled nickel for 30 years came up from shadow and delivered a girder as if the universe were a shipyard. The spindle's voice thinned. On the plots, template traffic slowed one tick. That tick was a door. "Pull," Naomi said. Tugs took what could be carried. The rest fell into Vega's wells in parabolas that would make bad pictures in gentle time. When the rings stopped glowing like hot metal and settled into the dull of things that will never shine again, the radio did what people do when language cannot keep up. Someone laughed. Someone swore. Someone said the names of those who did not come back. Naomi stood a long time, hands on the back of a chair that had no right to belong on a bridge, and forced herself to inventory. Losses, saved lives, mass budgets, the cost of every girder and every apology she would owe the star masons who would rebuild what she had bent. Then she opened a channel to the coalition and spoke without ceremony. "We did not win," she said. "We stopped losing at the pace the archive prefers. We made a calendar again. That is the job." After, in the quiet where commanders are simply people with notebooks, Elias found her watching Vega's sky bruised and healing. "They'll learn," he said. "They always do." "Us too," she said. "But we get to choose what we learn. They only choose faster ways to be themselves." She closed the notebook on a page that read in the same small hand, "Make only tools you will be proud to teach." The coalition did not find a single battle that ended the archive. They found a season, long, gritty, sung against the wrong key, during which defeat lost its inevitability. Static choirs held entrances. Curtains turned charges into knots. Gravel taught respect for friction. Fireships and barges and prospector tugs put new dents in an old word, invincible. Calendars replaced countdowns. With the forges at Vega broken and copper traffic slowed to a crawl, Naomi refused the victory tour that publicists begged for and crossed the belt in a maintenance shuttle that smelled like coffee. She taught. That was the work that had always mattered. It simply looked less glamorous than Fleet's. Her first classroom after Vega was in a cargo dome on Vesta where the ceiling leaked sunlight in pale coins. 30 children in mixed uniforms, ascendancy grays, combined russets, human blue jumpsuits filled the front rows. Behind them sat a half-dozen officers who wanted a plan and a pen. Naomi wrote on the board as if the war were a lecture she had been preparing her whole life. History is a user manual. Under it she wrote 3 subtitles: humility, redundancy, ordinary courage. Humility first, she said. The archive beat us whenever we believed our best story about ourselves. Crowns make us tall enough to be easy targets. Stools save lives. A few children glanced at the 3-legged stool someone had set beside the lectern. Naomi tapped it. If your city cannot be run from something like this for a week, then your city is unfinished. Redundancy, she continued. Thrones centralize glory and failure. Workshops distribute both. A throne fails once. A workshop fails often and keeps working. The archive adapts to the one. It chokes on the many. She told them about Procyon and the day a choir outsang a metronome, about Corin, Prime, and cathedrals turned into schools, about Vega and the rockfall written in pencil a year in advance. Redundancy is not waste, she said. It is mercy toward your future. Ordinary courage, she said last. Not the kind that needs statues. The kind that shows up to weld when you are not sure anyone will notice. The kind that says no to a shortcut because you will have to teach the shortcut later. She looked at the officers in the back. The kind that audits itself after winning. A WEF student raised a hand, harmonics humming. Commander Park, will the archive come back? Almost certainly, Naomi said. They are thesis-driven. They will write another version of themselves and come to test it. Our job is not to stop them forever. Our job is to be unappetizing, and in the meantime to live well enough that if they come again, they arrive to a galaxy that is not arranged to please them. After class, she walked the dome while children copied notes into paper books. Elias fell in beside her, reading the wall where students had taped artifacts. A coil of cable, a broken mirror lance focusing crystal someone had found in a scrap pile, a coffee mug with a dent. You keep putting that mug in museums, he said. One day you'll need coffee. They'll lend it, Naomi said. Museums are living rooms until further notice. The council tried twice to give her a rank that would last longer than cents. She declined both times. Varkesh crown replaced by a steel band hammered from a ship's frame cornered her in a corridor to offer something else. Then advise us, he said. No throne, a stool. I will sit when the lesson needs legs, she said, and get up when it can stand on its own. The Combine forged her a small axe from cable steel and asked her to hang it over a school door. She did, with a note beneath, for cutting nets when peace demands open space. Months slipped into a year entire. Archive probes still nipped at borders, but their advances had the feel of students copying old homework. Coalitions learned to share shame and credit with the same economy. Choirs practiced wrong on purpose and called it rehearsal instead of failure. Children on Ganymede could sketch a gravel gun on a napkin. A cadet on Corin Prime wrote a paper titled On Thrones, Stools, and Thermal Budgets. Naomi visited Kepler Prime only once more, because endings are heavy when you pick them up too often. The rebuilt chamber had fewer banners and more doors. The human section was not in the center. Nothing was. The chair belonged to whoever needed it that hour. She listened to reports that sounded refreshingly like work. A curtain shipment delayed by a strike the council wisely allowed. A choir mistimed on purpose in 3 different ways. A budget line that funded chalk. When they asked if she would accept permanent command, she shook her head gently and wrote on the nearest pad, "Teachers are a kind of supply line." "Then what do we call what you have given us?" Varkesh asked. There was no sarcasm in it, only the difficult intimacy of gratitude. "A reminder," she said, "that the most dangerous enemy is the one who knows your story better than you do. The archive tried to make us read theirs. We learned to annotate. When they come again, we will hand the book to our children and watch them write in the margins." She left before the applause became a habit and rode the lift to the docking ring. The window at the end of the corridor framed the Varan stars like coins scattered on velvet. Her shuttle looked like a grain silo with windows. She loved it. On departure, the pilot offered her the comm. She clicked it open and addressed no one in particular. The way you speak when you are certain the right ears are listening somewhere. "This is Commander Naomi Park," she said. "Class is dismissed. Class resumes tomorrow." In a school dome on Vesta, a teacher lifted a chalk stub and wrote a phrase on the board for a new class that had never heard the old fear. "History is a user manual." The children wrote it down and, strange and wonderful, believed it before the war asked them to.